Starting with Padmaja, maybe you could introduce yourself.
Sure, happy to. First of all, delighted to be here, and Bahrain, great hosting, great event. Thank you for having us here. My name is Padmaja, as Srini said. I'm a co-founder of Indian Angel Network. It is perhaps the world's largest angel investor group. We have investors from 12 countries, and we do about 25 to 30 investments a year. We've given an IRR of over 32% across 104 companies, and we are sector agnostic, 17, 18 sectors, so that's what we do. And I'm also on the co-chair of Global Business Angel Network, which is obviously one of the GEN initiatives. So delighted to be here.
Yeah, good afternoon, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Yaduvendra Mathur. I work for a government think tank called the National Institution for Transforming India. And we are a think tank. We used to be earlier the Planning Commission, but when our Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, he really thought through the need for real change, and that is transformation. So one of the big assignments that my agency does is to create the innovation ecosystem in India, along with the other line ministries. So we are running what we call the Atal Innovation Mission, and that is supporting about 6,000 schools with tinkering labs, and we'll talk about that more. So I'm in this forum representing that organization.
Hello everyone, my name is Jayesh Ranjan. I work for the Indian province of Telangana government. Many of you would be familiar with its capital city, Hyderabad. I look after the IT and industries portfolios, and I also oversee the entire range of smart cities and startups and innovation entrepreneurship programs. See, all of you would be aware that India is a federal country. There are 29 provinces. So I'll be bringing a state's perspective, a province's perspective on what happens from the bottoms up in the startup innovation ecosystem.
Hi guys, my name is Yatin Thakur. I am an entrepreneur and the country head for GEN in India. I've been leading entrepreneurship development activities across the country, be it from supporting grassroots entrepreneurs to get started with their ideas, to finally working actively, closely with the government in ensuring the right policies are formulated and implemented. So happy to have you guys today with us.
And my name is Srinivas Kolipara. I'm a co-founder of GEN India. I'm also on the board of GEN Space and a couple of other things. Currently running a fund. But actually the point of this session today was to talk about how is it that you build an ecosystem. Now, one of the things that I've heard from a bunch of people who are not part of the regular group that we interact with is that this word ecosystem is thrown about very easily, and it doesn't really mean a lot to people. What we're here to show is that actually ecosystem does mean something. And how do you impact it at a country level is that you have to involve every stakeholder. So ecosystem just means how do you involve the different stakeholders that all are working around helping startups to scale. Everybody in this room is involved in this in some form. What we're trying to showcase is that as a country, India's been really focused on this over the last 5 years and has done a pretty good job, I would say, of building this ecosystem such that today we're the second largest startup ecosystem in the world, whereas just a few years ago we were way down the rankings. It's been done by many people coming together, and this session panel is a representation of that. We have central government, we have state government, we have investors, we have ground up organizations, and we have people that build ecosystems at the top level. All of these pieces need to work hand in hand. So what we're going to do is try and highlight a little of what each of these guys have done and how we've built them all together. Because usually what happens is everybody's working in silos. Investors are doing their thing, governments are doing their thing, incubators are doing their thing. How do you bring it all together? So maybe we could start with top down, as we said. From the central government level, Mr. Mathur, maybe you could mention some of the activities that have happened at the government level to build the structure to help create an environment for this to happen.
Yeah, so, recognizing that, for a country and for an economy of our size, there is clearly and a very clear purpose at the highest levels in the government of India that we need to create a very strong, supportive ecosystem for the startups. And that was, for the last 5 years, that has been the driving mantra, that has been the key for creating the entire facilitation for the startups. Initially, we were trying to encourage some innovations to be there, but now we further relaxed that. So we have a very facilitating structure, and you can register online as a startup, and it can be done very quickly. And once you get your registration done online, then you are eligible for a whole slew of benefits. The key thing that the government is trying to do is to get you in a country our size. The markets are large, but the competition is also ruthless and brutal. So we are trying to mentor and handhold by engaging with the state governments. Like my colleague mentioned, it's 29 states, a country with challenges of its own, and we are also looking at in governments, the municipal bodies, the village communities, the federal government, the tax authority. Here we have 600,000 schools. So in a phased manner, each of the schools in India will have this a 3D printer, robotic kits, the whole length, even 6th class onwards, the students getting exposed to cutting edge technology. So this is not a part of their curriculum, but the joy of and the excitement of working with these has been a massive revolution. So as we speak, there are public sector which have got these, we call them tinkering labs. The entire data bank, so I don't want to bore you with that data, but 20,000 startups registered. Truth is, we have opened up the lending portals available, the facilitation is available. What we are really looking at
Incubators that have been funded by
the government and so various agencies, space missions, and so we are using cutting edge, best-in-class technology to deliver on the social challenges my country faces. And we are very sure that with the triangulation of the bank accounts, data, so I think the ecosystem is so fertile that the private sector, the young entrepreneurs, the old entrepreneurs, any age, India is the happening place, and the government is completely committed to supporting the strengthening of the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
So one of the things that I find heartening about the India story, especially when it comes to the central government initially, is that in a lot of early stage countries, what happens is governments run their own programs and they are not connected to the rest of the world. The rest of their country's ecosystem is what I mean. In this case, what the government has done is focus on things that only the government can do. So for example, tinkering labs at schools, as you said, in mass scale, to just get children playing with emerging technology and get them enlightened on that. Incubators that help entrepreneurs to start getting mentorship, etc. And then of course, they're actually listening to the rest of us over here on what's needed in terms of policy so that tech startups can scale. So it's been incredible to work with central government recently and see what they're all doing. But I'd like to take this conversation to Mr. Ranjan, who is the Principal Secretary of Industries and IT for the state of Telangana. So in India, we have a federal system. You have the state, central governments at the top, 29 state governments. So what they do is they dovetail onto stuff that's happening at the center. But in many cases, state governments can lead the way. And I think in many ways, Telangana has been doing that. So Jayesh, maybe you could talk about some of the initiatives you've done to support startups in Telangana.
Sure. So as Mr. Mathur said, there are a large number of national programs, national policies. But the beauty of India is that state governments also enjoy lots of autonomy in designing their own programs and fixing their own priorities. So much before the Startup India program in Delhi was introduced, our state had already embarked on a program to work with startups, to encourage startups. So I'll step back for a minute and give you a little bit of a background about Telangana. As everyone said, India has 29 states, and Telangana is the youngest state of the country. It got into existence just about 5 years ago in June 2014. And right from day one, literally, a decision was taken that if this state has to really march ahead, really leapfrog ahead, it has to work very, very closely with startups. So I recall something very amusing. After the state government took position, at that time, Hyderabad had around roughly 200 startups. So we gathered all of them in a room like this and asked them that what kind of help do you require from the government? And the answer was, unanimous answer, that if you stay away from us, that is the best help we can get from you. But we also realized that there is a reason from where these kind of answers are coming, because typically working with the government also brings into too much of micromanagement and over-regulation and so on and so forth. But we were clear that if strategically if we support the startups and help them create an enabling ecosystem, that will go a long way and that will be very, very valuable. And in the last 5 years, this is precisely what we have done. So we actually asked them that what are your pain points? And in Hyderabad, for example, where most of the concentration of startups is, one of the biggest pain points which was identified by the startups was that they don't have access to affordable space in the heart of the tech community. See, those of you who are familiar with Hyderabad, there's an enclave which is called Cyberabad, and that is where all the action is, all the top IT companies, the knowledge-based institutions, the tech schools, the business schools, they're all located. But because of the fact that it is such a buzzing neighborhood, the rentals are very, very high. And obviously for a startup to afford those kind of rentals will be very difficult. So obviously they get pushed away to farther, to more remoter locations, and in that process they become cut off from this kind of a happening activities. So the government decided that, okay, we will create a large space, a large incubator, and we will subsidize it for startups to operate from here. And today in Hyderabad, I feel very proud to share this with you, that the country's largest tech incubator, it is called T-Hub. And Srinivas used to be the CEO of that till very recently. That is up and running. It is a 70,000 square feet facility which can host about 800 people. And after we built it, we didn't realize that there is so much of appetite for high quality space, affordable space of this kind. And within weeks it got filled up. And now what our government has done is that we are building the second phase of T-Hub, which is 5 times bigger than the first phase. What we have built is already the biggest in the country. What is coming now, hopefully by the end of this year, will perhaps be amongst the biggest in the world. It will be a 350,000 square feet of space with provision for 4,000 people to operate from there. But that is not the only problem that we address. I mean, we have addressed, thank you. But we have tried to address other issues also. So for instance, another challenge which the startups shared with us was that they find acquiring their first customer to be very, very difficult because it's so competitive, and obviously for a startup to go around the market and acquire the first customer. So in our policy, we are amongst the first states to come up with a dedicated policy on startups and innovation. The state government has assured that if a startup has a product or a service which is of relevance to the government, then we will procure it bilaterally. I mean, typically, if you have to participate in a government procurement process, it is very complicated. You have to come through a bidding process, and most likely the startup will not even be eligible to participate in that bid because you won't have a track record, you won't have serviced any large customers so far. So we have done away with all these procurement rules, and we have procured bilaterally solutions, products, services from startups if they are of relevance to the government. And I again feel very proud to share this with you that in the last 4.5 years or so, we have procured at least 3 dozen products and services from homegrown startups just through bilateral discussions, without any procurement process, without any bidding and so on. And thereby, the doors of the bigger market have got opened because they have acquired the first customer. So these are some of the multiple things which a government can always encourage, the government can always facilitate. And today, we have spread much beyond the capital city of Hyderabad. We have today the largest number of incubators and co-working spaces for a city in India. There are 43 of them so far, and the number continues to grow. So we have created a state innovation cell, which in some ways standardizes the processes and approaches in all these co-working spaces and the incubators. We have started going to the smaller towns and tier 2 cities, as they are called, where we are doing a very thorough process of identifying innovators, potential entrepreneurs from the colleges, from amongst the community. Mr. Mathur spoke about the tinkering lab. One of the things which we have also focused on, that while we are creating amazing infrastructure for the startups in Hyderabad, we also have a responsibility to create the pipeline. And the pipeline obviously needs to come in a large measure from the colleges and schools. So in Hyderabad and around, there are almost 200 professional colleges. And we found that most of these colleges have very little, the students that is, have very little understanding on what it takes to become a successful entrepreneur. So we are creating entrepreneurship cells in these colleges, guiding the faculty on taking that responsibility to motivate the students. Typically in an engineering college, the students are required to do a project in their third year for a 4-year program. And what we had seen in the past was that most of this project reports were seen as a formality. You prepare something, you submit. The faculty doesn't demand any quality. The student also just sees this as a paper where I just get some pass marks, and that is good enough. But what we have done is that we have encouraged these colleges and the students to start looking at these college projects as an opportunity to get your first taste of entrepreneurship. So what we do is to tell them that you use this college project and try to convert it into a business plan. Of course, it will not be a great business plan, which too much of refinement and all, but the process of creating a business plan or developing a business plan, you get some exposure to it, and those of them who show an aptitude and flair for it, they are kind of encouraged to get into an incubator formally. So multiple ways in which, as I said, the governments can very strategically support the startup world. And as I said, 5 years ago when we started, we just had 2 incubators and 200 startups. And today we have almost 2,000 plus startups, 43 incubators, and programs running across the length and breadth of the province.
So I think one of the things that is quite amazing about what the Telangana government did is that governments tend to be doing a lot of different things to make large impact. And I think they did a few unique things. One was focus. Although you want to impact your entire country and your entire state, it's not easy to do right at the beginning. You actually need to learn what problems you're trying to solve. And so one of the first things that they did was actually create T-Hub, the company that I worked for earlier, as an independent not-for-profit, working side by side with the government. And so the government has a certain direction that it's trying to take its state. The not-for-profit actually works to push it in that direction, and then that's taken out further. So one of the things you didn't mention, Jayesh, is the fact that T-Hub came in and transformed Hyderabad first, and then you create a whole bunch of other organizations to look after different pieces. So there's a WeHub for women, for example, and there's a task for skilling, there's a
There's an institution called RICH, which promotes collaborative research between corporates, research institutions, and startups, of course.
Yep, and the hardware one as well.
T-Works.
Which is also building the largest prototyping thing. And the idea was, rather than trying to do everything in one go, focus, do one thing, and then scale that. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Padmaja, from the Angel Investment Network, you've been in this for a while now. How have you seen the Indian ecosystem change over the last 10 years?
So, you know, as I was listening to Mr. Mathur and Mr. Ranjan, the thoughts that were coming to my mind, how quickly has India changed? You know, I mean, India was actually a colony, and then it adopted a socialist economy. And then when in the early 90s, when it liberalized, I think the entrepreneurial genes of India just unleashed. And it created the first industry in India which was completely first generation, which is the IT industry. And while it created an industry which is now close to 200 billion or more, rather 225 billion, I think it had a much bigger impact. It had an impact of actually rebuilding India's self-confidence. It created a new generation of entrepreneurs, people who were middle class and first generation who could do it from garage to IPO. So we had Infosys with Narayan Murthy, we had a lot of them, we had NASSCOM's, many of the founding members like Saurabh Srivastava, we had Jerry Rao. All of these were first generation entrepreneurs who created industries. Then we had the next wave with Sanjeev Bikhchandani, created Naukri, which is India's largest portal, and now the consumer internet company with a stable of unicorns sitting there. You had the Make My Trip with Deep Kalra, and then you had the later. So, what it did is actually unleashed a whole generation after generation of entrepreneurs. And I think that created a completely new India for us. Completely new. Very confident, can handle anything, to be honest. Build the new India, cater to what Mr. Mathur was saying a bit earlier, to focus on the needs and gaps that we have. And we have many challenges and we have many problems. To address those. And remember, we not only have challenges in terms of infrastructure or healthcare or education, we have another very big challenge. We are a sixth of the world's population. And we are not 29 states, but we are 29 countries put together. Because each state is a different behavior, has a different customer behavior, has different needs, has different weather conditions, everything, terrain, everything. So how it works in a very synchronized manner as a federal government is really something which is very amazing. And when we look at it from the angel investment perspective, actually for us, that was the opportunity. This created the very fertile ground for entrepreneurs and startups to breed. It created a confidence level which we had never seen before. There were the challenges which were actually opportunities. And there are umpteen of them. So it began with the IT industry, I must say that. It moved from services to products. But today, I think the virus of entrepreneurship has gone right across all sectors. So we have entrepreneurs across the board, agri, cybersecurity, education, healthcare, you name it, and there is a virus of entrepreneurship you see there. And interestingly, what it has done, India has done something which is just phenomenal. It has taken IT, moved it from being a vertical to a horizontal. So it actually empowers and enables startups to start very quickly, to create ventures which can scale very rapidly at a low cost and catering to different customer behaviors. I think that is not possible in most other countries around the globe. And we've seen many countries, I don't think that works. This is something which is really unique that we've seen in India. And for investors, this is absolutely it's like ready-made. It's like manna from heaven, because suddenly you can see a very different kind of companies emanating. You see different kind of entrepreneurs who breed. You build models which are very different. Look at some of the stats, and I'm just going to give you two stats. Which country, today India has Udaan, which is a unicorn, which came up in literally 2 years. I haven't seen that happen in any country. You look at Naukri, which is the stable of unicorns today. It has Zomato, it has Policy Bazaar, and it of course itself is a unicorn. You don't see this very often. And the quality of companies, these are not fly-by-night. These are big, huge, sustainable, building, growing companies which are disrupting behavior, which are disrupting customer behavior across the strata, not in just one economic strata. And I think that's what really excites us as angels. So what we did at IEN is we started getting business plans, and we started as a small, very local group. But unfortunately, we are still Indian, right? And it's just not possible for us to not think scale. So we said, hey, this doesn't work. And we created a platform so that investors from not only around the country, but now from around the world can invest in startups on our platform. And everybody has real-time information, equal rights to participate, help the companies, and they have to help the companies beyond just writing a check. So we literally institutionalized what angels should be doing, and which is the genetics, is to bring money, mentoring, and market access into an operational model. And that has really worked for us, because we've now invested in about 150 companies, and our companies are literally giving us an IRR of over 32-33% and a failure rate of only about 15%, which is the reverse that you would see in most other startup ecosystems. And I think this is what I think mentoring and helping companies is so much more important than just money. The second piece which has happened in the last 5 years is startups have become almost the go-to career option. There doesn't seem to be any other option. There were no startups before 2014 or 2015 rather. You never heard about them. Now we have Economic Times, you'll have Times of India, all the major publications, center spreads full of startups. That's the big change that has happened in 5 years. On January 16th, 2016, which was the startup, when the Prime Minister of India announced the Startup Day, it was completely a paradigm shift on how people in the country thought about startups, how they engaged, and how the fear of failure completely diluted. And I think that's very important, because when you go entrepreneurial, there is bound to be failure. When we invest, there is bound to be failure. It's a given. You have to accept that. And I think that is where the government and whatever it did in creating not only an enabling ecosystem, which Mr. Mathur and Mr. Ranjan spoke about, but I think at a much higher level of creating a culture of accepting failure, a culture of startups, a culture of risk investment, which is angel investing. When we started 12 years ago, there was no angel investing. We brought it into the country. Today, angel investing is sitting as a established itself in HNI portfolios. In fact, we are talking to the government to say, how can the next level of wealthy people get into this? And I think this is the big change that has happened. Further that we've done, and I think I must take this opportunity to actually talk about it, though it's a little beyond angel investing, but the government and I think the ecosystem together has created sources of funds for startups to then access more money as they grow. So we have the fund of funds, which is 10,000 startups, which is about what, 1.5 billion?
10,000 crores.
10,000 crores, which is about $1.5 billion.
$1.5 billion.
$1 billion available, right? And it's opening up, banks are opening up, institutions are opening up, family offices are opening up, all sorts of organizations are opening up. But importantly, overseas companies and corporates and organizations are looking at India right now. And I think they are starting to put in money. And I think that is very, very important because of two reasons. Number one is India has created itself literally the market of opportunities for young companies to grow very rapidly and scale, number one. And number two, some of the things that Mr. Mathur and Mr. Ranjan were alluding to, it's created a very conducive environment for investors and entrepreneurs to actually build companies. And therefore what we did, we took a little bit of an advantage of this entire change that has happened, and we've now created the single largest horizontal platform for seed and early stage investing in the country. So if an entrepreneur wants to raise from about $10,000 to $12,000 to $7-8 million, you can do it on a single platform. Just keep growing your business and pulling down money from one room to the other. And I think that to me is very, very important because fundraising takes so much time. I mean, many of you in this room are entrepreneurs and you'll understand this and empathize this. We are trying to just crunch that fundraising time to as little as possible, but not taking away the quality of money, not taking away the mentoring, not taking away the ability to create a global market access for our young companies because that's what they need. And I think all of this has come together again with a lot of policy making, a lot of tweaks, a lot of responsive and and proactive policy making that has enabled us to happen. So in one sentence, if I wrap up India today from an investor's perspective, because our job is really to get married, get a divorce and get alimony, that's our job. I think it couldn't be a better place to be in today. I think India is really rocking and we are enjoying ourselves and really making money as well.
So I think, thank you for that. So I know that there are a lot of people in the room who are building ecosystems and your countries are not as advanced, right? And one of the things I think we need to point out is that one of the things that's differentiated the thinking of everybody on this stage today versus the old thinking is that everybody's taking a long-term approach. Nobody was looking to make quick returns. As she said, it's been 12 years in the journey. If you do not have a long-term approach and you're expecting quick results, you're going to be very disappointed. When we started T-Hub, one of the things that we said was, we need to build something that will last for 20 years because that's what it takes to build an ecosystem. It's not 5 years, 6 years. And that approach needs to be there. And you have to look at the different pieces. So policy, infrastructure, investing, mentorship. And so India today is really thriving and changing. But Yatin, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you run co-working spaces on the ground. You've seen unicorns born in your living room, literally. What's been the change for you over the last 6 years you've been running your spaces?
So Srini, I would say it's been 15 years, right, since the time I started my entrepreneurial journey. The word entrepreneurship never existed. This buzzword of startups wasn't there. The ecosystem and the community which we talk about didn't exist. And that was my challenge when I was starting out of my living room back in those days. From there on, about 6-7 years back when I got into supporting the ecosystem, I realized the Indian youngsters who were passing out of colleges were literally jobless. There were people who were starting up ventures, but they didn't know how to sustain those ventures. There was lack of infrastructure. There was the cost of starting up was very high at that point of time. So if you wanted to access the infrastructure, it was super expensive. The doors were open only to people who were privileged. Again, if you had basic education, you couldn't do much. I think that's the difference which we created from the grassroots perspective, where we picked up on some of the international programs like Startup Weekends. We started building communities of people who were experimental, who were dropouts but trying to do something on their own, who were coming up with new ideas but couldn't find a market to validate it. So we said, hey, you know what? Let's put them in a room and let's see what happens. And while we put them in a room, let's provide them the best access at the most affordable price. I think that made a significant difference in the lives of a lot of people. We have success stories of unicorns starting out of my living room 7 years back. These were the people who were trying hard to do something, but they didn't have the resources and the support to take their ideas to the next level. So when peer-to-peer mentoring started happening, when everyone who was thinking in the same boat started sitting together in the same room, they started talking about their problems. They started accessing the pipeline of customers themselves. They started working in a shared economy concept where they started figuring out the secretarial services, the HR services, the accounting services from a single person. That allowed most of them to save costs, cut costs, prolong their journey without raising a lot of investments, and validate their ideas to take it to the next level. And from there on, I think what we have seen in the last 5 years, how the government came with a strong push to support entrepreneurship, how the investor community started reciprocating to new ideas, has sort of allowed to bridge the gap between the grassroots communities and the top level communities, and that's the biggest strength which the country has at this point of time.
Yeah, and I think if you're building any kind of an ecosystem, right, you actually need both sides of this. You need the top-down approach, which is how do you do capacity building? How do you make sure that everybody gets the resource they require, whatever that happens to be? But at the same time, you have to have the other side, which is focused on filtering them down, making sure that the top few become really successful. And you need both sides of those to happen together. How much time do we have left?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? So I think maybe we could open up the floor for a couple of questions before we finish. Do we have microphones?
We can hear you. Why don't you?
Yeah, you can just shout
you
it
can
out.
shout,
Otherwise.
yeah.
There is mic.
Can you speak to everyone?
There is a microphone.
Or,
Please stand and speak. It may throw the
Yeah.
voice.
I think it's coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you to GC. I am really proud and very happy to see all of you. I'm living in Bahrain for the past 24 years. I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a fintech company 9 years before. So 10 years I was a social worker, and then after putting the kids to proper education, then I started my own company. And now for the past 8 years I've made around 400 clients in Bahrain itself. So very recently we had been to Hyderabad. We had been awarded a full delegation. We were there in Hyderabad. So I was also one of the award holder. It's so happy to see all of you in one panel, especially in Bahrain. This is what we were looking for. And I wanted to ask a question, how to scale up the company being an Indian entrepreneur in away from India. So is there any possibility where government can support the Indians who are outside Bahrain, outside India, who had already set up their company, the scaling up, mentorship, or to go to the next level? This is one thing. And how we can also sell our products, which we have already proved in the Bahrain market, to bring it to India, where you had kindly expressed that government is ready to take the products to test it. So we have done reconciliation, RPA products, chatbot, artificial intelligence, and we have also done machine learning, classification of customers. So such products are already proved in the banks here, in financial sectors in Bahrain. Now how I can bring it, and as a proud feeling, bringing back our products to our own country. So these two areas I need your advice and guidance. Thank you so much.
Which one?
Want to take all the questions
Yeah,
together? And
we could do that. And I think that's one of those questions. So the session is on building an ecosystem. So I'd like questions on the ecosystem side. Maybe we could take that one offline and talk about that. But I think depending on, we have several things that could help. There's a
But
bridge
I think
program.
the question generally, one of the things I'd like to share is, at the national level, there's a very clear message to all federal agencies that data, once it is, sanitized for security and privacy and other issues, data is the new wealth for any economy. And we really can build solutions, innovations around data. So whether you're in Bahrain or you are in Hyderabad, data is available. So India is committed to putting more and more data to drive so as we say, India is the Saudi Arabia for data. So that is one sector, segment. You mentioned machine learning, AI, you're looking at industry 4.0. So there is a national artificial intelligence strategy paper out there. So I think the ecosystem is well set in India for wherever you are to access the data and then, productize in India. And we would encourage you to, even invest in India. So it's not about being, so the FDIs, the foreign direct investment, this is as good as a time, in fact, was never better. FDI is just pouring in. You see the figures, foreign direct investment is guaranteed, massive returns are going to come. The information pool is there, the challenges, social impact investing, it's an opportunities galore in India. That's the point. But I think there was a question there.
This side first. Hello. That one next.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I am feeling proud, and I must appreciate the government is working very good. Since last 5 years, I'm also teaching entrepreneurship, and the change we can see, young entrepreneurs are coming. The people are talking about entrepreneurship, and I feel very proud being an Indian that we are changing very fast. But my concern is that still I feel that our ecosystem is largely government driven. As in private school people, we are also trying our best. But the government is, why government has to come everywhere to push the things? Why we are not creating a environment, the private people by themselves, like we people are coming and supporting this, motion and movement for young entrepreneurs. That's my.
Can I take that?
Okay, let me take that one. I just mentioned that India's first industry was the IT industry, right? And it was a first generation entrepreneurial industry. Other than the Tatas, everybody was first generation, right? And that is now pushing to be a $225 billion industry in 25, 30 years. Okay, the reason, and I have to say, I know I have people both in the audience and on the panel from the government, but that industry happened despite the government, okay? And there are many anecdotes which I would not like to share on the dais, where the industry actually happened because the government was not interfering or not getting into the way. In fact, even at that time, the government was helping, but in a very, very muted way. Second, I think if you look at today even, if you look at the government's role, especially in angel investing, it is not dictating, it is not coming in the way. It's an enabler. It's not running investments. It's not even Atal Innovation. I don't think it runs the incubators or the innovation labs or the tinkering labs. It's an enabler. And for a government, I think enabling and building infrastructure, building development ecosystems, pushing, that is its role. So, yes.
We give a grant. We give out $2 million per incubator. Clean grant.
So everything they do is actually in partnership with private. So they're doing incubators with partners. They're doing fund of funds with partners.
It didn't happen earlier. It's happening now, and therefore you think it's.
So.
One person. He has the mic.
Sorry, can't hear you. 1 second.
Sorry, I tried.
Yeah,
this is really helpful stuff. What were some of the key catalysts or change agents that allowed you to change the mindset of the investors, to go from folks who wanted to have something tangible like real estate, weren't comfortable with failure, had a very 3-year point of view, to saying, you know what, I can see that 7 to 10 year horizon. I'm willing to take this and invest. What were some things that helped you?
Okay, so it's a very, very good question, because changing mindsets is probably the most difficult thing. I think for...
Go for it.
No, keep
Go
going.
ahead.
No, you go.
She's talking about investment. I was talking.
So I think what we perceived as angel investment, which is a very high risk asset class, you're going to lose money as a given, right? I think for us what worked is the first group of angels that came in and literally drove this entire wave of investing were first generation entrepreneurs themselves who had succeeded. So they were completely wedded to the idea of entrepreneurship. They had seen the wealth and value that they had created, both for themselves and people around them. They understood the arduous journey that they had gone through. They understood what kind of help they could have done with, right? And there was a huge level of empathy and hand-holding. And for them, because they created their wealth from entrepreneurship, they didn't see themselves creating the similar wealth from real estate. Does that answer your question?
But also, Padmaja, didn't you do a lot of working with your angels to teach them about?
We do a lot of, we still do for that matter.
That's right.
We still do a lot of training of angels. We do a lot of hand-holding, lead induction programs and all of that. That's number one. And number two, yes, we also had to do as angels, we also had to sort of curate the ecosystem. The first business plan competition in the country that we did at national level, which was with the Economic Times, and Economic Times is the leading, which is the leading publication in India. We got 37,000 business plans in 31 days. Okay, and we did another one with Mr. Mathur when he was running from the Rajasthan government organization. We got 45,000 business plans, right? We invested in a fraction of that, but what it did, it just unleashed the mindset. It brought it right up there. So again, to your point, it's just not the government. I think the private or the non-government, if I should say, is also sort of helped curate the ecosystem.
I think we have time for one last question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Joel from Botswana. Thank you very much for the encouraging story about India and the development of ecosystem. I just wanted to understand, maybe I may have missed it, but the obstacles you overcame to be where you are. The challenge that we have is where those people who are supposed to facilitate, government is supposed to facilitate. But when you come with a new system like that, you find a resistance within say, the government system to facilitate the investors. How did you overcome that problem? The second thing, when you come to dealing with finances, you talk angel investment. Sometimes investors, instead of developing businesses, they divert the funds. Did you have problems like that, and how did you overcome if you had?
But let me tell you one thing, see, startups and the SME sector, sometimes we get confused about the two. There is absolutely no way that you can create this ecosystem without accessing cheap debt. So nations will have to go through that pain point. You will have to find out debt, long-term debt if possible, and then invest it to create the infrastructure. You have to roll out your connectivity so that a startup can so the economy and nation will have to access long-term funds to create the infrastructure on which the startups, the investors, the angels can invest. Angels won't invest if there is no background, if that infrastructure is not available. So economies will have to access debt also. So very often in these conversations, we don't talk about what I call venture debt. There will be debt which will, go non-performing. So the government will have to come in with financial institutions which will extend debt. Padmaja was mentioning about the IT industry, but some of the bigwigs in the IT industry started not with equity. They all started with debt. And Infosys got its first loan from the Karnataka State Finance Corporation. So the starting has to be done by some hand-holding by government developmental financial institutions to extend credit. So in India, we have a very large program called the Mudra. So we have a national DFI, government has fully capitalized it, and we have given these small size loans to hundreds and thousands of, small, very mom and pop stores, and they've just got access to very cheap debt, and the default rates are not there. So I think your question was more about first ramping up the SME ecosystem, whereafter some of them will move to equity. So it's impossible to expect every startup to, everybody to get equity. It won't happen.
So I think we've run out of time. So I want to thank you all for being here for this session. Thank my panel members for giving their valuable suggestions and advice and talking about what they've done in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
We have another very distinguished gentleman who would like to speak. Mr. Gupta would have been on the panel, but I think the panel didn't have chairs. Would you like to share a little bit? Please, give him the mic. No, he's a very distinguished professional.
We should take a picture.